How does embracing our mortality lead to living bigger, bolder, and with more purpose? Is talking about death off limits, or does courageously facing our inescapable expiration date lead to discovering what life is really all about? I'm Morgan Motzinger, and this is the PS We Expire podcast. Each week, we'll unpack insights from psychology, neuroscience, and spirituality to equip ourselves with ways to navigate our inner world and relate to others with more courage and authenticity. Grab your sense of humor, your burning questions, or your very favorite existential crisis. It's time to explore the thrilling and challenging limited time offer we call life.
I guess there are many things that I consider to be driving life principles for me. The first thing is that the older I get, the less interested I am in material things. Just coincidentally, I need a lot less and I desire a lot less because, and I don't want this to sound at all arrogant, but I feel as though I've sort of transcended that to an extent. When I was younger, sure, I wanted to drive the BMW convertible and all those things. And, once you've done them, you just go, okay, that was fine, but surely there's more. And so even though the vast majority of people feel as though and think and articulate that if they only achieve a level of material wealth and success, they will be happy. And it's clearly not the case. Money's never been the answer. If it were, you wouldn't find so many trust fund kids committing suicide. And I just feel as though we have a luxurious position in being able to transcend that and then think to ourselves, what do I really want to contribute? What's my impact going to be? What's my place in this world? And how do I serve other people? And once I got to that stage, it really changed the way I looked at the world. So that was useful. Now, don't get me wrong, Morgan, money's cool. Money helps you to do a lot of things, to have experiences, to have choices, and to be free from the sorts of temporal concerns that would otherwise drag you down into the day-to-day. So it's sort of cool to have enough. But if you feel as though having more and more is going to scratch that itch, I don't think it does.
I feel like I've heard that from many people where they say, once you hit X amount of dollars and you're really having more than probably just your basic needs met, it's like there's not really anything that can be added to your life that really, like you said, like scratches that happiness itch. But like my dad used to say, money doesn't buy I know that money doesn't buy happiness, but I'd really like to find out firsthand if that's true. And I think that is like the position that so many of us are in is we see people living a way that we want to live with the amount of freedom that they have that comes with having, not just our basic needs met. And we think, surely that must be the answer. And in a world of this is how you accomplish XYZ by following steps 1, 2, 3, which makes perfect sense with how our brains are wired to look for patterns, look for the easiest route to get there. It makes perfect sense that we'd be like, maybe this is the answer. And it's thanks for sharing that when you got to that point, you discovered, oh yeah, everything that people said about that is actually true.
Yeah. And look, maybe even more than that. I think there's a concept of money and. So if you have money, it's the and that matters. Having money on its own does nothing. It doesn't help you. But having money and the opportunity to be conscious about where you spend your time. Good colleague and friend of mine here in Boston basically says, the reason I have money, I fly under the radar, I don't have a lot of it, but I've got enough that I can make any choice I want, anytime I want. I want to take a week off and just go and do a tour with my kids who are playing in a lacrosse tournament somewhere. I just do it because I've got choice. And I think that the money equals choice is useful and money equals experience is useful. So yeah, so there's something there, but it's got to be money and not money full stop.
Yeah, for sure. So so you said that when we achieve a certain amount of money in order to bring more flexibility and choice into our lives, then we start to ask ourselves this question about what is my purpose? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? And I'm really curious about your transition from working in these huge companies to starting your CEO mentor in 2018. Like what happened? What exactly happened that prompted you to take what looks like such an enormous risk And I suspect there's so many layers to this story here, and I just want to unpack that with you a little bit.
Yeah, sure, Morgan. And I think we tend to over-index the risk of moving and under-index the risk of staying exactly where we are. So the move wasn't as risky as it might seem. There's risk in anything. If you're a corporate executive, you risk, any given day that a redundancy will come through onto your desk, or you'll make a mistake that is fatal, or do you know what I mean? There's always going to be something there and some level of risk, even though it feels more secure when you have a paycheck dropping into the bank account every month. My journey actually started a long time before I set the business up. I was being, I guess the word is mentored by a guy way back in 2006 who was very, very spiritual and helped me to tap into my spiritual side. Basically, I'm an ex-Catholic, for anyone who wanted to know. I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore. I got good, so I don't need to practice. I but but I found when I went away from the organized religious side, I eventually started growing my spiritual side a lot more. And the guy that coached me, his name's Colin Clark, was, or he calls himself a corporate shaman. So he's like a business coach who taps into um, your deepest heartfelt desires and purpose. And I worked out working with him that I wasn't put on this planet to just work as an executive in a company. I was put here for something way different and probably a bit bigger. But I had no idea what form that was going to take. And I wasn't in the position where I was able to do anything about it at that point. And so I sort of bounced along for a number of years, and I had a great corporate career. I was in a reasonably good position at that point. But beyond that, I had some great jobs in some great companies and did some awesome things. And I loved every minute of it. But I knew deep down that that wasn't why I was here. It wasn't what I was meant to do on this planet. And it just manifested like this little thing that occasionally would ping me in the back of my head. You know that feeling, did I leave the iron on?
Mm.
Or did I lock the car? You know how you have that, just those little moments where you go, oh, it just doesn't quite feel like everything's sitting right. That's what it was like. It just pinged my subconscious occasionally. So when I had the opportunity to do what I did, and by the way, Morgan, you'll get to know that you only have to ask a really small question to get a lot of stuff out of me, which is cool, right? Um, my daughter, Emma, who is now 35 years old or turns 35 very shortly, probably my biggest fan. I brought her up as a single father from probably the age of about 15 and a half because I was separated from her mum. And so she came and lived with me. And we have that sort of bond that you can only get by being a single parent to a teenage daughter, right? That's the sort of bond that sort of stays with you. And she'd been saying to me, come on, Dad, you've got to do more than this. Why don't you set up a business? Because I think you've got more to contribute to the world. And it sort of fit in quite nicely with my my already primed position in my head, where I was thinking, I need to do something more. And she came up with the idea of your CEO mentor. But the funniest thing was, the business model she described to me, I considered it to be completely unworkable. So she said, you need to get your stuff out into the world because you are helping so many people, but you're not broad enough in the impact you're having. And I'd always known I was driven predominantly by impact, the impact I was having on other people and the impact I could see in the world. And I was sort of drawn to this concept. So when she said to me, Dad, we're going to set up a business and you're going to give away your very best stuff for free. I said, okay, just talk me through that, would you? So she explained the business model to me, and I put my arm around her shoulder and said, darling, let your dear old dad explain to you how business works. I had no idea about this new, digital marketing content-led model that she was taking me down. But she convinced me, and I had enough faith in her to say, okay, you know what you're doing. You're a smart girl. And when we come back to the risk thing, Morgan, it was a case of what's the worst that can happen, right? I take 6 or 12 months. We don't have any worries funding the business and de-risking it for ourselves. So why don't we just do that and see what happens? And if we find that it's something that takes off, awesome. Let's stick at it harder. If it's something that, tanks immediately, well, we'll go back and get a job in a year. So it wasn't really as big a step as it might sound, even though I was primed career path-wise to take on that next bigger CEO role. But that didn't sort of excite me. I felt as though I wanted to be doing something different, something that had broader impact. When I thought about the specter of another CEO role, what I realized was if I was running the biggest company on the planet, if I was running Alphabet or Boeing or any of those companies, how many people am I going to impact directly? You know, maybe 100, and 50 of those don't want to be impacted.
Hmm.
Whereas now with this business, I'm impacting hundreds of thousands of leaders every month because they want what we've got and what we're giving them because it's valuable to them.
The I wrote a couple of things down. One of the things you talked about when you were working with this mentor Clark was you said that you were not in a position to do anything about it. So you started to have this kind of niggling
Mm.
sensation that there's something different for me, there's something more for me, there's something bigger and has a broader impact and fits you better, but you weren't in a position to do that yet. And so I'm curious, like, what was it about where you were at that made you feel like I can't do this yet? I know it's out there ahead of me somewhere, but I can't do it yet. And then did you have like conscious steps that you were taking to take yourself from I'm not in a position yet to saying yes to that thing?
It's a really good question. And I think I probably view it slightly differently
Hmm.
now with the benefit of hindsight and reflection than I would have at the time. Back then, I just thought, I don't have anything to offer. Literally, I
Uh,
don't have anything to offer. So when I said I wasn't in a position to do it, it wasn't financial or technical or there were no constraints on me. I just didn't know how much I had and what I had and whether it would be useful and valuable to other people. And as time went on, the things I did after that, I'm a huge believer in the fact that everything happens for a reason. The timing is the timing for a reason. And the timing for me was perfect because even the last 2 or 3 years of my last chief executive role at this company, CS Energy in Australia, even the last 2 or 3 years, the things that I learned in that last 2 or 3 years before I set up this business have been critical learnings in my ability to impact and serve the community of leaders that we have globally now. And so the timing is all about when is the point at which I am a coiled spring, just ready to unleash what I have on the world. And as I said, the timing's the timing. I don't think I was overly conservative. Um, I think I was learning voraciously all the way through to the point where I really felt like I had this stuff nailed.
what were those couple of things that you learned just on the tail end of that career that made such a positive impact?
I think I learned a lot more about the empowerment and compassion side of leadership. I was always pretty driven. I was always considered to be a good leader by both the people who worked for me and the people I worked for. But I really feel as though I wasn't as constructive in people's development as I should have been. And this is a little bit difficult to explain because I developed people professionally incredibly well because that was part of the whole ability to lead high performing teams is that you've got to be able to develop people to bring out their best and have them on their, A1 trajectory career path. But I just don't think I took into account enough of what they wanted, what they needed, what they had to offer. I developed them into a mold, right? So that's one thing. Another example is that my execution skills were only okay.
Hmm.
And I'd got some awesome results because most of the time, the way I did things worked really well. But there were some occasions where I'd be blindsided, and I won't go into all the technicalities of it, but I really learned how to nail execution so that there was nothing that wouldn't get done efficiently, quickly, and with incredibly high value delivery, which was how I managed to get the results I did in that last chief executive role. And so those types of things where for me, the realization of what I'd been doing wrong hit me like a pie in the face. And I was just, whoa, I didn't realize I had this upside that I just wasn't being able to capture. And once I got that, I had a huge amount of confidence. Now, it wasn't like I was waiting for that before I said to myself, okay, now's the time to go.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot more serendipitous than that. But still, as I reflect, those things were actually important in what I'm doing now and my ability to convey these concepts to people who are struggling with the same things I did.
For sure. I saw one of your I pulled a quote from one of your videos that you said that to be a good leader, you need to establish trust, which is this marriage between congruence and competence. And then in another video, you talked about how pointless it is to try and make your employees happy, which I thought was such a good way to think about this. If we're talking about establishing trust with the people that we're working with, a lot of that is only an outflow of the trust that we establish for ourselves. So when there's internal congruence between our values and what we want to contribute in the world and where our skill level is the only way that you can kind of impart that knowledge to someone else. And I think that many of us fall under this like false assumption that everybody just wants to be happy. Like that, touching back on what we talked about at the beginning, is we're like, money is going to make us happy. Well, I don't think that that's actually what people want. I think what people want is to have life satisfaction. They want to be doing something that is meaningful. They want people who see them for who they really are. And I think that the danger in a lot of areas of like personal development and professional development is that there is given too much attention to only one aspect of the person. And so as you're talking about in the last, couple of years before leaving this corporate position, and saying one of the things that you learned was maybe things like having to do with empathy and being able to be a really good listener, and understanding that the person who walks through the door doesn't leave the other parts of themselves or their life behind when they walk through the door, but that comes with them. So if they're
Yeah.
having, they just had an enormous fight with their spouse, and they're, like really going through it at home with their kids or whatever, like they're coming into the office or the workplace or the mentorship relationship with all of those things with them. And so if we're going to be good leaders, if we're going to be good listeners, we can't ignore all the other aspects that actually make up a person's life.
No, that's absolutely right, Morgan. Interestingly, once you get to a certain level of leadership, when you're responsible for, large groups of people, I do still believe that you've got to be able to manage that stuff. You've got to be able to put the stuff that you've got that's bothering you in a little bag and leave it at the door,
Mm.
and be professional and competent during the day. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have compassion and that we don't understand and know what's going on. But for me, you wouldn't be able to tell if I'd had, a 4-car pile-up car accident on the way in to the office that day. I'd walk in the same as I would every day. And if there was anything that was bothering me, that would be left at the door, because people need stability. They need to look up to someone who's got their act together, not in a way that is fake or disingenuous or contrived, but in a way that says, we've all got stuff going on, but I'm here to serve this organization, to serve you guys, and here's how I'm going to do it, because I'm going to get my act together and leave it at the door. Now, there's a huge amount to be said for, and I became very, very good at this later in my career, which was to sense the slightest changes in one of my direct reports. So they're reasonably senior leaders, right? Senior executives. These guys are getting paid, $500,000 and up a year. So they get, you're on pretty good money. And you expect them to have a level of professional competence. But I could tell, because I knew them well enough, when they were having the slightest little issue that was causing them some personal grief. And I'd be able to say to them, hey, what's going on? It's not like you. I saw you just a little bit slow in this meeting. You hadn't prepared properly. Is there something going on for you? And I would open the door to some of the richest personal conversations you could imagine, just by paying attention, by looking at the people that I knew, not just looking at what they were doing or looking through them, but really looking at them and seeing if they were under a little bit more stress, or seeing if they were upset about something, or seeing if they were a little bit of a shorter fuse than they would normally have. And so there's that balance between come in and do your job because you've got a job to do, and you're still a human, and I know you're carrying this stuff around, and I'm going to cut you slack when you're going through these hard times.
I wonder how much we think that. Well, so I heard this from Simon Sinek not that long ago, and he talked about how oftentimes we just need 8 minutes. We just need 8 minutes to be able to talk with someone about really what's going on, and be able to share and have somebody there to listen to us. And I wonder if sometimes we get worried that if we broach these conversations with people, that it's going to be like this deluge of emotion, and like we're not going to be able to get through it. And I think that ends up contributing to people feeling so alone and so lonely,
Absolutely.
particularly in places where they spend the majority of their time, like a workplace. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and when you were talking about and this is going to tie back in, but when you were talking about your daughter Emma telling you, like, Dad, I think you've got this in you, and I think we could really do this. You said that she is your biggest fan. And I don't know that people understand the significance of having someone who believes in you. You know, I've
Oh,
I've
absolutely.
I've really investigated this topic of resilience quite a bit, because I've asked myself this question, like, why is it that there are some people who go through really hard things and they seem to come out on the other side with more sturdiness, more, they're more resilient, they're more tenacious, they're more impact driven on the other side of hard things. And then some people go through hard things and they just kind of crumble under it and don't seem to be able to cope. And I
Yeah.
think one of the most key parts of that is having someone who is there for us and having someone who believes in us. So can you talk about what that was like to have, like, would you be in the same place that you are now if Emma hadn't believed in you and supported you and cheered you on in the way that she did?
Well, absolutely not. I'd be doing something else amazing.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, it's true, Morgan.
Yes.
I've just, because I'm so optimistic um, about life and about opportunity, and I feel so grateful for just being able to do the things I'm doing. I know that I'd be doing something amazing in another field, and that's fine, right? I don't want that to come across as being arrogant. In fact, if anything, it's probably a little Pollyanna-ish.
Mhm.
But the fact that Emma believed in me was a really good start. More to the point, though, she's a dynamo. She
Mhm.
is so clever, so switched on, so driven, so capable. Um, she's unbelievable. And so, a combination of her belief in me and also her own drive and willingness to do what she's had to do to get the business to the stage where it is now. I think it's a combination of those things. But I also have the unquestioning support and belief of my wife, Kathy. And she's had to endure some stuff as well. When we set up the business, we were all living in Australia, of course. But I decided that when I published the book, I wanted to publish in the US because otherwise it just never finds its way out of the Antipodes. So I published over here, and we moved over here in 2021. Now my
Mhm.
wife's a Bostonian, and the last thing she wanted to do was move back to Boston. The last thing she wanted to do. She hates the cold and she hates the traffic. Those are her two
Mm.
major hates in life. So I brought her back here to give her a liberal dose of both. But she didn't question me. She said, if that's what you need to do, I'm all in.
Mm.
And so having that level of support and encouragement and belief, I think is exceptionally important. Now, having said all of that, there's hard things and there's hard things. I don't think that I've really had to go through hard things. Not the same way you have, not the same way many people I see have. Um, I've got a very, very close friend in Australia at the moment going through a battle with cancer. That's a hard thing, right? And I've led a pretty charmed existence, to tell you the truth. And sure, there's always been setbacks and disappointments and obstacles and knocks and all that sort of stuff. And I go through those really well. I'm the sort of guy that's just, I'm going through that barrier, I'm going under it, over it, around it. I don't care. The barrier's not stopping me. And so I've always had that level of um, resilience to doing the things I need to do. But I don't know how I'm going to respond when I get something really hard.
Mm. What do you contribute, or what do you credit that to? Like, what were you like that as a kid? Very like, I'm gonna get stuff done. Nothing's gonna stand in my way. Is that very personality driven, or what? How did you come to that?
Uh, I, I wouldn't describe it necessarily as personality driven. I'd certainly describe it as nurture driven, certainly
Mm.
from my family of origin. So our parents were, and I was brought up in Sydney, Australia. Our parents were incredibly encouraging and supportive, incredibly interested in what all of us did. I'm one of 5 children in terms of our education, our sporting achievements, and so on. And we picked up a lot of those things both from them and from the schooling system we're in, the private schooling in Sydney, where, we went to some of the top private schools, and there was a sense in those days of, well, you are given talents, and to not use those talents is a sin. You need to expand your talents um, and give to other people based on the gifts that you've been given. You're in an incredibly fortunate position. Don't blow it.
Hmm.
And so that's always sort of stuck with me as really a driving force in my life.
I like that phrase, like you've got these gifts, don't blow it.
Yeah,
And that is true for any of us who have the extraordinary privilege of being alive right now.
for
And
sure.
I appreciate what you said about the difference between hard things and hard things.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think the reality is that, none of us gets to pick the hand that we're dealt, but
yeah,
we do have the opportunity to learn how to play the game. We do get to understand where can I place these cards to maximize and show the gifts and the talents that I have. And what I really appreciate about sharing these parts of your experience is when you said that you weren't in a position to do anything about that, the belief that you had in yourself, that there was a bigger impact available to you, that it wasn't, like you said, there weren't any outside circumstances that were preventing you from that, but it was an internal sense of like,
yeah,
do, do I have what it takes? Do I have enough
for
to
sure.
share? And that's one of the things that I wrote down about leadership, is that I wonder how many people feel that same way. Like I know that I have a bigger story to share. I have so much in me that I want to give to other people and that I want to serve in these ways, but I don't believe that what I have is good enough or valuable enough. And I'm just wondering, like, how did you was there a conscious attention to those feelings in yourself, and like how did you address that?
I mean, it's quite a complex question, Morgan, because I think it was driven by my personal story, like the story that we tell ourselves. We all have a personal story. There's only 3 or 4 of them. They're quite common. Mine was, I'm not good enough. And the I'm not good enough story still plays in my head all the time. Um, I don't particularly like the expression imposter syndrome. And I should tell you the reason I don't particularly like it is because it gives us permission to be victims.
Mm.
Oh, I feel like an imposter. It's something outside of me. I am good enough. I'm going to ignore all of those signals and just push on. And I did a podcast episode a few months ago, which I really enjoyed doing, which I called Arrogance, Confidence, and Self-Doubt. And the conclusion I drew in that was that self-doubt is super healthy. If you're a leader, you should be questioning yourself. You should be questioning your competence and capability. You should be questioning your intent all the time, because that self-doubt, that's the handbrake that stops you from becoming overconfident and arrogant. And so self-doubt as a handbrake is something that I think, healthy people have. And it's not necessarily imposter syndrome, but we tend to label these doubts as imposter syndrome. I'm not a fan of that particularly. So that's a little tangent I went off on. So I'm sorry about that. But I think that for me, it wasn't consciously trying to overcome the story of I'm not good enough, because it wouldn't matter how much I did or how much I'd achieved. It really wouldn't, because I could do some amazing things and then go, yeah, but you didn't do this, or yeah, but that was just lucky, or do you know what I mean? There was
Mhm.
always going to be something in the back of my head. So I think it was more about, um, I think just surpassing that by realizing and focusing on the impact I was having on other people, the amount of good and valuable things I was putting into the world that was really helping people. And just to have the emails and direct messages and comments that come back all the time that just say, Marty, this changed my life. I did this and it changed my life. And now my relationship with my kids is better. I'm a better leader, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I can never read enough of those. Probably only about 1 in 10,000 people that feel that way actually takes the time to tell us, but they come in, thick and fast enough that it gives a lot of affirmation about what we're doing. It still doesn't break my main story. It doesn't dent the I'm not good enough, but hey, good enough or not, I'm doing some good stuff at the moment. So that's all I need.
It's almost like this instead of I think exactly what you said, like people who ignore that little voice and like tamp it down as much as possible end up coming across as, as very arrogant or like know-it-alls and without that healthy dose of self-doubt. And it sounds to me like the key then is to say like, oh yeah, I do feel this way. I do feel like I'm not good enough. And you just get to come with me feeling of not good enough. And I'm still going to do the things that I know in my gut I'm supposed to do in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of describing it, Morgan, is that, you're coming with me, like it or not, we're going to do this. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
It's like it's fine. You can just turn the volume down a little bit on the narrative that I'm not good enough so that I can get my work done.
I don't think about it very often at all, but
Hmm.
even after all the success we've had in the business, your CEO mentor, occasionally I'll say to Emma, just for fun, because she's still in Sydney and I'm in Boston, but occasionally just for fun, I'll say, yeah, I know we're doing okay, but what if it's shit? What if no one likes it? What if no one
Mm.
listens? And we've got one of the biggest leadership podcasts on the planet now, but I still occasionally say, but what if it's rubbish? So it's
That's what I was gonna ask you,
just a
Marty.
bit
I
of
was
fun.
gonna I was gonna ask you like when can you pinpoint like patterns in your life where that feeling does crop up the most? Like are you almost able to anticipate now like, oh well, here it comes, like I've done XYZ and I know for sure like this is the narrative that's going to be coming up at this point.
Oh, I don't think really anymore, Morgan. I don't think there's ever been a pattern to it. Just occasionally it'll ping me just to remind me not to
Mm.
get too big-headed. I dealt with it in my conscious mind a long, long time ago. So it hasn't been a conscious impediment to me for many, many years. But it's still going to come up emotionally occasionally. It'll still well up and I can feel it and I go, "Ooh, there you go. You're still around." Like seriously,
Mm.
dude.
I think that's so helpful for people to hear because perhaps that's one of the things that we expect that success will bring us is relief from these feelings and relief from these 4 or 5 stories that you said that everybody has a part of themselves. In your work with CEOs and high executives and companies, what are some of the repeat things that you see come up kind of along those same lines of those repeating stories that would just be nice for people, for the peons to hear, oh, like these are the things that my boss still deals with. And these understanding like that all of us are still just human trying to navigate our own emotional landscape as best we can.
Yeah, yeah. And I think talking to all of your community out there, Morgan, who are reporting to bosses who aren't good bosses, the message I'd give is give them the benefit of the doubt
Mm.
for their intent. Most of these people are trying to do the best they possibly can. And the things that stop them from doing that, the things that cause them to do things that seem to be, cruel or uncaring or anything else, are mainly driven by fear. A fear of conflict, a fear of getting something wrong, a fear of being seen to be inept by their people, a fear of, their job security. Most leaders are driven by that fear. I was very fortunate. I learned very, very early on in my career not to be afraid of that. And the reason was because I had a couple of experiences quite young. I'm talking about, mid 80s young, where on one occasion I made a very, very big mistake as a young software developer for a bank, caused huge problems. And the financial controller called me up to her office to find out what had gone wrong on a Monday morning when everything was supposed to be running smoothly and the bank had no systems.
Oh man.
And and she asked me, no, I was a young guy, I had 3 or 4 layers above me who should have been taking accountability for it, but they sort of threw me to the wolves instead. But I had a choice when she asked me what went wrong and how it happened, and I said, I'm I just did not anticipate this problem. I should have seen it. I didn't see it coming. I screwed it up, and by the time I worked out what was going on, it was too late to roll everything back. So we had to push through to the end of the implementation, and we're going to be without systems for a day. And as soon as I took accountability for it and said, this is mine to own, then she said to me, oh, that's okay, Martin, you're doing a fantastic job. I just wanted to make sure I understood what happened. That was it. And when I walked out of there, I thought, how cool is that? Like I had that split second decision.
Hmm.
Do I say, well, I couldn't have anticipated that and this went wrong and my boss should have had oversight of this and blah, blah, blah. But when I took personal accountability, it completely changed the way she viewed me. So I've never had a fear of doing something that was going to have repercussions. The second thing was I learned not too far after that, that being afraid for my job security was the dumbest thing I could do because it would affect how I performed in that job. I've never been afraid of losing a job. And I've always thought, if I'm not here, I'll be somewhere better. If this company doesn't appreciate and understand and value the things I'm doing, it's just clearly not the right place for me. And so I'll go somewhere where I'm more suited to them and they're more suited to me because I know the value I can bring. And I always had that attitude. So it stopped me from having any fear around speaking out in a group or, being having a contrary opinion to my boss or, making comments in public forums. I mean, it took away all of the fear I had of the types of things that normally we're afraid of. And the third thing, because there is one thing that was also critical, was that I realized that I wasn't there to be the best I could be. I was there to help other people be the best they could be. I learned the concept of leverage super early as a young team leader. I learned that I just kept putting in more and more and more, and it just didn't move the needle that much. But when I worked out how to get my people to lift another 10, 15, 20% of what they were doing, the results just flowed through like a hurricane. It was amazing. So I learned leverage early as well. And learning those things made it really easy for me to not be a leader who was fearful, aggressive, closed, discompassionate or anything else. I was just, I guess, lucky that I learned those things really early.
I was thinking about this, like some of the reels that you have, like you have 4 strategies that'll help you navigate corporate politics, 3 mistakes I made as a new senior leader that you should absolutely not make. You have posts about, like, if you're in middle management, how do you move up? And I can see how fear would be such a huge component to all of this, that so many of us get into those positions where we have to make that split second decision between telling the truth and taking personal responsibility or trying to foist it off on someone else because we're afraid. And I think that the more, this might be like one of the most key important things to learn in life, is that the more that we can become the person who it becomes easier, maybe not easier, but quicker and quicker to make the choice to take personal responsibility and to tell the truth, the more satisfying our life is going to be. Because if we continue to move through life hiding and
Yeah.
fearful and down, even coming to the point where we downplay our ability to make contributions, because we are afraid of being seen for everything that we are, fear will keep us small and unsatisfied in our lives always.
Oh, very, very much so, Morgan. And I think also the fear response drives us to do things that we don't want to do or that we know aren't right. So we'll agree with an opinion that we absolutely don't believe in because it's what we know our boss wants to hear.
Hmm.
And when you do something like that, they're just micro decisions every single day. Am I going to do this or am I going to do that instead? And after you make enough of those, if you wake up in the morning, you're finding it hard to look at yourself in the mirror because you can't hide from yourself. And I've always valued extremely highly my ability to wake up in the morning and look at myself in the mirror and go, yep, you're doing all right. That is above everything else, the most valuable thing I have in my life is the ability to be congruent and content with the way I'm living. Now,
Hmm.
it's not to say I've always been like this, right? I've had experiences in my earlier life where I experimented and went off the rails a little bit. And it didn't make me happy. I wasn't happy with that. I only find my true happiness where I'm true to the sorts of things that keep me in good shape with myself, with a good relationship with myself. If it's not for that, then, I just don't feel right. And
What
anytime I go off it, I don't feel right.
Yeah, what are some of those things that keep you in good relationship with yourself? And perhaps this is just a question about like defining our own values and living in alignment with those values.
I think it is. I think I think for me, it's just being true to myself, true to my opinions, true to my belief system, uh, true to the way I feel as though people deserve to be treated. And it's driven by my philosophy and my view of the world. Don't make any mistakes about that. So, for example, I'm a very strong believer in personal accountability. I'm not a believer in, sponging off society. And I know there are people who are in genuine need. Don't get me wrong here, right?
Mhm.
But in the world, there are leaners and there are lifters. And I want to be a lifter. I want to be the one who contributes, who drives things, who makes it happen, and who supports others. I don't want to be someone who's leaning on someone else. And so that's a conscious choice, but it really colors the way I look at things. And so for me, if I felt as though I was getting a free ride from someone or I was, you know, leaning, as a metaphor in any particular way, I wouldn't feel right about that. And it wouldn't sit well with me. And that's just me, right? Everyone's different about these things, but it's important to me. It's an important enough that, if I ever see anything like that happening, I'll step on it straight away and just go, hang on a minute, mate, that's not you.
Mm.
Like, what are you doing here? So it helps to guide the way I respond to pretty much any external stimulus.
Are you at the point now where you have practiced that so much being congruent with yourself that there aren't a lot of things in your life anymore that end up going long term that don't feel right?
Definitely. Yeah. If it
Mm.
doesn't feel right, I just won't do it. And that isn't just I'll give you a good example. So all those reels you were talking about,
Hmm.
um, our marketing team in Sydney does that, right? Any post you see on LinkedIn or Instagram from me, look, mum, no hands, right? Now I will review the copy, okay,
Mhm.
so that we know what's going out. Now our marketing manager Tash, who's awesome, she'll just send it through to me, overnight, and I'll just peruse everything and just say, yep, that's all good. However, occasionally something will come through and I go, that's not quite right.
Hmm.
Now, would it be fine to post? Sure. But when I look at it, I go, yeah, but I don't really think that. And it's really important that anything that turns up on my social media page is an absolute representation of me. It's what I feel in my heart of hearts. It's what I believe, and I'm happy to stand up to it. So, for example, if we're posting something about what's one of those really good myth-buster arguments that we like to have? Well, let's go back to the making people happy. Right.
Hmm.
This is a good one because there's been a few pieces of research that are finding a loose correlation between employee happiness and performance and productivity. Right now, I just think it's a load of rubbish. Making people happy is pretty easy, right? In the short term sense, you can make people happy by giving them an extra day off a week, letting them work from wherever they want, giving them a 30% pay bump. Like you can make people happy. It's not that hard. But true long-term happiness only comes from stretching people to do things that they don't necessarily want to do and to show them the path to personal achievement. It's the only way you can build self-esteem in someone. Look, Morgan, I often say the older I am, the less certain I am about practically everything. I'm just, there's so much more, there's so
Yes.
much more gray in the world. It's so much harder now. It's
Yes.
10 or 15 years ago, I was adamant about so many things. And now I'm just going, I don't know about this.
Hmm.
I can see that perspective now, which is why I'm hopeless in the US, because I look at the far right and the far left and I go, I can see both those points. Wow. How interesting is this? um, but it is intriguing. But the one thing I really believe is that all self-esteem comes from doing difficult things,
Hmm.
either having them forced upon you or choosing to do them. Because when there's something that either scares you or is uncertain or you feel as though you might not be able to do, when you actually do it, it gives you a boost of self-esteem like nothing else. And if you apply that to the work context, as a leader, I used to feel as though my job was to give people that feeling. Now, the trouble
Hmm.
is, the majority of people don't want you to stretch them. The majority of people just want to come in, do their job, go home, collect their paycheck. Thanks very much. And why haven't I been promoted yet? But for the people who really want to stretch and really want to go forward, once they get that feeling of doing something really hard and achieving it, that becomes self-sustaining really, really quickly. Where's my next challenge? What can I do now? And so you'll build a high-performing team on one or two individuals who are absolutely top of the pile, and then you'll have everyone else who's hitting a standard that is still super, super high, right? You drop the standard too far, then it hurts the whole team. But when I think about, that sort of making people happy, we trivialize it. We talk about happy workers being productive workers. It's just not true. Workers who are high impact and high self-esteem, who are doing hard things, are really happy, not the other way around.
I agree with you 100% on this, that like I on this podcast, I've often talked about my journey into entrepreneurship. And one of the things that sticks up to me the most is exactly this. It was like, as soon as I was in this world of like, I don't know how to do any of this. I was like
Yeah.
learning bookkeeping and how to build a website and like all,
Yeah.
all of this. I was learning marketing. I was, all of these new things that I was doing. And I was just like, okay, like I'm going to figure it out. And the more that I did that, my confidence absolutely soared.
Sure.
And I love what you're saying about that people actually, well, we don't like to be stretched. We don't like to do hard things because that is just our basic biological wiring. And that makes perfect sense why our brains are like, conserve as many calories as possible by doing the things that the bare minimum, do it the way that we've always done it. But I think that if we're talking about what it means to live a life of living in a satisfactory way, where we look at our life and we feel good about it, we feel proud of it, I think that is like at the root such a basic evolutionary component to being human, is like, how do I grow? How do I grow? And so as leaders, creating opportunities for people to grow into what is actually possible for them. But I'm really curious about the self-stretching. Like we can create environments where I've done this with my kids. So my kids are 12 and 8, so they're still pretty little. And sometimes I will give them tasks that I know are just a little bit too hard for them. Like I
Yeah.
know that they're not going to be able to do this perfectly. They don't know how to do it. And it is really difficult to step back and watch them struggle. It's so hard. But I trust that that is how confidence is built. That is how this self-sustaining model, this is how, when they actually do hit that milestone, that they feel so good about themselves because they really struggled to get there. And so I'm wondering, like, how do we develop this in ourselves when there isn't somebody who's pushing us? And I saw in your bio how you talked about how you ran a marathon, at least one, maybe two marathons. And
Three. In fact, I trained for 7. I made it the starting line of 3.
amazing.
Very injury prone I was.
Oh, I see. And I would venture to guess that nobody was making you do that. You decided to stretch yourself in that way, to self-stretch, because you saw the benefit of pushing yourself to do hard things. And so when you're talking with leaders that maybe have like accomplished a lot, or you're talking with leaders about how to engender stretching in their employees, like what are some of these ways that we can foster this in ourselves to pursue things that self-stretch us?
I hate to put anything down to you've either got it or you haven't, but I
Mm.
suspect with this, it's largely the case. I've always had, from as far back as I can remember, the willingness to stretch myself, probably because of my deeply dysfunctional need to be validated. Probably,
There's
right?
that I'm not good
So,
enough story again.
yeah, well, that's right. Yeah, and I found that when I did exceptional things, I mean, going back to when I was in 3rd grade at school, I remember doing things academically that got me huge amounts of kudos, and I worked hard to get them, and I've gone, how good is this? This positive feedback is sensational, and I think it all sort of comes from there. But even if you're not brought up with that, once you get the feeling that comes from that boost of uh, accomplishment that you get from doing something extraordinarily difficult. As I said, it becomes self-sustaining. You look for that next challenge. And I think by the time I was running marathons, I was, sort of in my mid-30s. I had, years and years and years and years of the stretch and reward
Hmm.
mentality and experience. So it doesn't even enter my mind that something hard is, something that I may not want to do or that I should be afraid of. So, publishing a book in the US, yeah, that's going to be really hard. I've got to move. I'm going to get taxed by both governments. So there's a whole range of things that are going to happen to me just by making that decision. But that's okay. That'll work itself out because I know it's going to be hard and I'm going to push through it. And our mutual colleague and friend Nick Morgan, uh, who sort of coached me through that process of publishing, said, "I've never seen anyone hit so many obstacles," because I started writing just
Hmm.
before COVID, hit so many obstacles and just keep bouncing back and coming and overcoming them. And it's purely because I just, maybe I'm just a dumb, blunt instrument who doesn't know how to say no. But I know that when I get to the other side of it, I know the feeling's sensational, and I sort of live for that. And one of my favorite leadership quotes, which I always come back to when we talk about stretching people beyond where they're comfortable being stretched, is the quote from Rosalind Carter when she said, uh, "A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader doesn't take people where they want to go, but where they ought to be." And I think that says everything because it's easy to lead people to a destination they all want to go to anyway. It's, hop on the bus, we'll get a, a cooler full of beers. You can all have a drink on the way and we'll get there and we'll all be happy. But saying that bus is going to Nashville, this bus is going to New York, I'm going to New York. I know you don't want to go there, but New York's where we need to head. It's almost like that. And the people that get on that bus are the ones that are ultimately going to get the reward because a lot of people are just going to go to Nashville. Love Nashville, right? But
Do you,
but
do
just
you
yeah,
do you think that hunger and satisfaction in doing the hard things is like you see it play out across all different facets of someone's life? So for instance, when you were talking about an employee that comes to work and just wants the paycheck, wants to go home, doesn't think about it, is it possible that that happens to be just one area where they're not interested in pursuing being
absolutely.
stretched? Or do you think that it is like, if you're not seeing it in this area, it's probably not in these other areas?
No, I think there are definitely cases where people have priorities, where something in their life is really important to them and they do stretch themselves enormously. And you see this a lot with people who do charitable and
Mm.
volunteer work. They are often driven to do extraordinary things because that's who they are and that's where they see their contribution being. And they might come to work and go, hey, I'm here because I need money, but
Right.
tonight and the whole weekend, I'm going to be doing something else, something that's important to me. And I think that's okay too. But what most leaders fail to understand is that those people who declare that their job and their career isn't the main thing, they don't just get a free kick. They don't just get to come in and sit down and spend their time on the internet preparing for their, charitable work that night.
Mm.
They've got to do their job. They've got to do it to a high standard. And as long as they meet that minimum acceptable standard, happy days. We don't, I understand you're not career driven. I understand you don't want to go up through the hierarchy, but you've got to do the job you're paid to do to a standard that we're happy with. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. So I've sort of deviated a little bit from the question, but I think some people absolutely can channel their energies and drive themselves towards something exceptional in another part of their life. It's more the case that you find people who are either like that or not. So,
Hmm.
you'll find that the top corporate executive is also, you know, I don't know, also running marathons, also doing this thing over here, also, trying to make sure they spend enough time with their kids, also doing this, that, and the other thing. So you get a pattern in terms of someone's behavior, I think, more than anything else.
Hmm. I think the falling in love with the struggle is probably such an important component to optimism. So, in order to continue to look at the possibilities and opportunities that are available to us and not be a victim, not have a victim mentality about our circumstances, it becomes really important to say, like, I'm going to do these things even if it ends up being total shit. Like even
Yeah,
like
yeah,
when you
yeah.
were talking about starting your company and saying, I'm going to give it 6 to 12 months. And, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. That is such, I think, a healthy way to view trying new things, and a healthy way to view risk, whatever that risk happens to be, when we can say it's actually very low risk, because I know that whoever I come out on the other side of this is going to be more of who I am, that the failure is going to continue to point me in the right direction, that the more that I learn about myself through this, like, nothing is wasted. Nothing
That's
is
right.
wasted.
That's exactly right. Nothing is wasted. I know that, the old cliche, everything happens for a reason, but I absolutely believe that. I genuinely do. And so if something doesn't pan out the way I expected it to, well, that's because it wasn't meant to be for me. It wasn't the best thing for me. And the universe is preparing something for me that's even better just around the corner. I just got to keep going and find out what that is.
Hmm.
But it enabled me to become extremely comfortable with, uh, let's call them tier two hard things, because there are tier one hard things, right? Let's call them tier two hard things. Um, but it made it uh, extremely comfortable for me to do those types of things, because I always felt as though it was either taking me somewhere better or giving me an edge. And this is probably giving up way too much about myself and my competitive nature, but I used to think that the harder it got, the more I liked it. Yeah, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? Because this is where everyone else is turning around. Most
Hmm.
people don't go through this. I go through this. I'm not turning around. They can turn around. And this is where I'm getting my edge. And I used to feel awfully self-righteous going for very, very early morning runs when it was dark and cold, and just going down darkened streets where all the lights in every single house in the street was turned off. And I used to feel so good about that, because I'm doing something that most people won't do.
Hmm.
Now, that's probably incredibly unhealthy mentally and emotionally, but it's a lot of who I am. The harder it gets, the more I like it. And it has enabled me to withstand a bunch of tier two stuff, but it's also enabled me to maintain a real sense of optimism and gratitude that I'm wired the way I am, and that I've had so many opportunities to do things that make a difference. It's just, it's a dream.
I wonder how much of that is like the understanding, part of personal responsibility is taking a hold of the thoughts and the narratives that we have running through our minds all the time. A lot of the times they're this subconscious story. And you already talked about the one that bubbled up to the surface that you're aware of, is the narrative of I'm not good enough. But I think that having that mentality about hard things is a choice. Like, I'll be at the this is a funny little hack that happens to work for me, but I'll be at the gym and I'll be, lifting some weights and knowing that I have like 4 more reps to do and I'm just beat. And I look at myself in the mirror and I smile so that I can signal to my brain that I actually like this, even if I don't. It's like just this funny,
Yeah,
like, weird little feedback loop where I'm
absolutely.
telling myself, you like this. This is, it may not be fun, but you like it and you see the value in it. And I wonder how much is helpful. I wonder if that's actually like a really helpful thing for us to do when we're going through hard things, is to take captive those thoughts that say, I can't do this anymore. Take captive the thoughts that say, this is the worst thing ever. This is going to kill me. This is probably one of the most insidious narratives that people don't recognize they're letting run on a loop, is this is never going to end. This is never going
Oh,
to get
yes.
better.
Yes.
That one will suck the life right out of your soul if you believe that your circumstances can't get any better and the way that you feel right now is never going to change. And it contributes to people feeling less empowered to actually make choices, hard choices, choices that fear accompanies them every step of the way. But making choices like, how do I go and talk to my boss about getting a raise? How do I apply for this promotion? How do I have this uncomfortable conversation with my spouse? Like, I was just thinking about, I can't imagine that, and maybe I'm just projecting this onto you, but to have this conversation with your wife and say, like, hey, I know that you hate these things about Boston, but like, we're gonna, can we talk about going back to Boston? There are so many people that, and I'm not saying that this is how your relationship is with your wife at all, But I know that there are many people who have things happening in their relationships, whether it's a work relationship or personal relationship, that doesn't feel like it can get any better, so they don't even try to change it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure that's the case, Morgan. Um, I think for me, there are still some, very tricky and treacherous areas in, our marriage that we have to traverse, but we're no different to anyone else.
Hmm.
I think the willingness to be open about things and have the conversation is the key. If you feel as though there's no area that you won't put on the table, I think that's sort of really useful. And one of the things that you said a moment ago about choice, I think is a life-defining principle. So many people I know feel either trapped or feel like they're victims, feel like they don't have choice. And I see it so often. I see this in CEOs of large businesses where they say, I wish I wasn't doing this, but I don't have any choice.
Hmm.
And I think one of the most liberating things we can possibly do is to realize that everything, everything is a choice, but your choices lead you to where you are. So every day, every single choice you make, be it small, big, conscious, subconscious, all your choices just take you to where you are eventually. And so recognizing the choice and saying, okay, choices have consequences. I'm choosing to stay with my wife. I'm making that choice consciously. I could choose to not stay with my wife. What would that mean? What would be the outcome of that? What would be the downside? What would be the upside? And I think once you realize that you're making a choice to stay or a choice to go, it's incredibly liberating. You don't feel trapped. You don't feel like a victim. And I've managed to use the concept of uh, examining my choices as genuine choices, even when they're,
Hmm.
sort of not even really a choice to be made, has really helped me to take a healthy perspective on any place I happen to find myself in, because I've chosen to be there. When I've put on a few lbs, it's because I've chosen to do it. I've chosen to have too much fun. I've chosen to drink too much beer, and eat too many waffles, and here I am, right? And I'm here because I chose to be here. If I want to choose something different, I do something different. But I don't ever feel like I'm a victim. That's useful.
It's incredibly useful. I remember having this realization with my daughter. So, Annie had a degenerative genetic disease. And I often thought, like, I didn't choose this disease for her, and I didn't choose this life for myself. And when I realized that I actually was choosing that life for myself, because I could choose to leave, I could choose to do any number of things other than what I was doing. That was a really big turning point for me, because it helped me show up in my life differently. And it helped me at, like, every time those like poor me thoughts came up, I'm not just going to stuff them. I'm going to give them attention and say, okay, like, there might be other things that I need to supplement in my life that I'm not right now. But every time I remembered that I was choosing to be there in that hard thing, the suffering was relieved. So
Yeah,
it didn't make the
absolutely.
thing any less hard, but it removed this layer of suffering, of resistance of what was actually happening. And I wonder how many of us have such a hard time telling the truth about how hard something is, or actually looking something in the face and saying, like, okay, this is the reality of this. Like, for instance, someone who's in a CEO position and they feel like they want to do something different but they can't. Maybe part of that is because they're not telling the truth about the negative impacts. Like you said, it's like always weighing what the impact is of a choice. And so staying in that position is hard, but are we actually not looking clearly at what the risk is, or the perceived risk is, of leaving? Are we actually telling the truth about how much this is impacting me to stay versus to go? And
Absolutely.
that's an incredibly courageous thing to do. And some people, I don't know if we need to just garner the skills or the courage to be able to look at things clearly like that. I don't know.
Um, maybe it's part skill, maybe it's part courage, but I think a lot of it is just awareness.
Mm.
A lot of it is just that I don't think people are aware of the fact that they're making these choices. No one teaches this stuff in school. You don't hear about these sorts of life principles. You discover them, or you're taught them by someone who's close to you as a mentor or as, a close family member or whatever. But you don't generally get to hear about this stuff.
Mm.
And so the ability to deal with your choices as choices is one thing. Also, the ability to see that inaction is a choice. Staying where you are is a choice. Not getting out of your comfort zone is a choice. And it's not so much, I could have been a contender if only, if I had this, then I would have done that. That's externalizing something that's completely within your control. And to externalize it takes away your power, but it also takes away your responsibility. So you can feel as though you're where you are because you didn't have any say in it. And that's got its own level of comfort as well.
Our brains love comfort so much.
Oh, totally, totally. As you said before, they're geared to minimize the amount of energy they burn. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing, I know this is going to be a little bit of a left turn, but one of your really super popular social media posts was that leaders can't be friends with their people. And I wanted to ask you about that. I want to ask you about your take on, for people who are in leadership positions, what does that look like to be a good leader, but not necessarily be a friend?
Well, this is I'm really glad you've pulled this one out, Morgan, because this is the principle out of all of the leadership principles that I espouse. This is one that gets the most pushback. Mm-hmm. And I have people saying all the time, but hang on a minute, but I am friends with my team. We get on great. And this, we get on well and we perform well and it's a great team and we're all friends. And I need to, of course, clarify. What I say is you've got to be friendly, not friends. Now you've got to work out where that line is. So for me, friends is, we're drinking together on a Friday night. We're seeing each other in our off time. We're sharing things that only friends share in terms of ourselves. We're close enough that reciprocity of friendship starts to play in. Once you get the friendship principle of reciprocity coming in, it changes the way you lead. So what I say is, if you are friends with someone who reports to you as a leader, two things are going to happen. They're going to take advantage of your good nature, and you're going to cut them more slack than you should. Not because either of you do it intentionally or because there's any malice or forethought, just because this is how friendship works. This is reciprocity. And so what I say is you need to be friendly with your people. And when I say friendly, you need to connect with them. You need to know what drives them, what their interests are and their hobbies. You need to know about their families. You need to be able to talk to them on a very personal level sometimes, and to be able to have those conversations that I spoke about earlier, the types of conversations where you're saying, hey, look, you're a little bit off this week. Is anything going on? Is everything okay at home? And, like being able to have those conversations. You can't just come out of the blocks and have those with someone who you don't have a level of connectedness with. So there's got to be connection. There's got to be compassion. But as soon as you tip over into friendship, there's a whole bunch of stuff that just doesn't work anymore in that work context. I have people saying to me, I met my husband at work. Happy days. Let me just pull out the, stack of newspaper clippings about executives who've been sacked because they had a relationship at work. So choose your poison. That's okay. But there's always going to be outliers. The minute you've got a friend in your team, then all of a sudden everyone else feels as though you're playing favorites. They feel as though it's cliquey. They feel as though they're not on a level playing field, and it's no longer a meritocracy. And as soon as you do that, the performance of the team goes down. So it's a broad and deep impact that comes from trying to be friends with someone who you're in the workplace with. Not to mention the fact that, if you're friends with someone, you're going out on a Friday night and you're getting on the booze together in the nightclubs, guess what? Your team member is going to find out something about you that they probably shouldn't know. And that's not good. So for all of those reasons. So yeah, like I said, I get a lot of pushback on that one from people who say I've had a really good friend in a team and it was awesome. But, I look at the very best relationships I've had. They're friendly. Doesn't mean we don't see each other outside of work, but it's it's kept within the bounds of being friendliness, not being deep friends.
So if you have somebody on your team that you're like, I think we could be friends, it's time to fire them so you could be friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that
It's sort
oh,
of weird. It's like the difference between a romantic interest and your sister, right?
uh
The people on your team, that's your sisters, right? So you look at them, you go, yeah, okay, I love you, I want to be close to you, I want to know all about you, but hey, we're not dating. You're my
mhm.
sister, right? And
Yeah.
the same thing with and same thing the other direction, of course.
I would imagine that this doesn't necessarily apply if it's a lateral kind of relationship. So someone who has the same amount of, say in the company or the same amount of authority or whatever, like the friendship can evolve laterally, but not so much when it's a leadership position.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I think those sorts of friendships are quite important. That you've got a level of trust and connection with people, and that's harder to build when you're not having that day-to-day contact in the work environment.
Mm.
So that is a bit trickier, and building a friendship there can be um, less problematic, should we say? But you'll still find some of the same dynamics going on in terms of cutting a friend more slack than they should deserve, and them you know giving you more rope than you should have. It's
Mm.
still the same dynamic. And I think, particularly when it comes to romantic relationships in the workplace, and I know that, they're bound to happen just because of proximity. You're spending a lot of time around these people. Their good points and their bad points are going to be magnified and exaggerated because you're spending so much time with them. And so we see these relationships start up, and I just can't work it out. I look at it and I go, you know, there's what, 7 billion people in the world,
Hmm.
and you want to mess with the 20 who are next to your livelihood? Really? And I know it's never that conscious a choice. It's never that deliberate a choice. And, oh, it just happened. Okay, I get that. Humans are humans, but for me, I've always liked to keep that quite clear separation.
Mm.
I think for credibility and trust, I think that's really important.
I would imagine too that, like, especially the further up you get in leadership positions, the more I don't know, I could see myself being less trustworthy of someone who's super friendly with me that works for me. Like, because it would be this
Yeah.
question of like, what do they want? What are they trying to get from me? And I guess that's like maybe the place that we could go next for just the next couple of minutes is talking
Yeah,
about
so
this.
just before you do deviate down that path, there is one thing I want to give you, which is the flip side of that, Morgan, which I
Mm,
think is important, is that there is a power dynamic in that circumstance. So there's the trust of, hang on, what are they really after? Is it me, or is it after the power, the position, and the privilege? And my thought was always, when I was in more senior roles, there's a power dynamic here. I have to be really careful how I wield this power, because I know that I'm going to look much more interesting and
uh,
funny and attractive sitting in this role than I would if I was a peer or a subordinate. And so that power dynamic is important to think about.
I think that's a really important key, I think, to this conversation about friend, being friendly but not friends, is that as the leader, you need to understand that power dynamic. I think that's a really good point, Marty, um that having a clear understanding of um what authority does in relationships and in work dynamics can help you have a better bead on like why friendships in the workplace may not be a good idea at all.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess the last thing I wanted to ask about is particularly for people who are in higher leadership positions, is loneliness a big factor for a lot of upper executives? And I guess I should say this as like probably more to the point of what we were talking about earlier, with how there are some people who are just driven to grow and evolve, and that I don't know that that's actually the majority of people. And being someone who is driven and ambitious and always looking for the next way to stretch ourselves can feel really isolating at times, like that people don't get you. I'm like, what was the
You know,
question in there that I just asked?
no,
Like,
no, 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 no.
is
I
that
think
something that you
I
see, I
think
guess, in
I think you've invited me to be as expansive as I dare about loneliness in leadership roles. Um, it's sort of weird, Morgan. I never felt lonely at any point in any company, in any role, no matter how big it was, no matter how how much accountability I had, no matter how difficult it was, I just never felt lonely. I'm not sure what all the factors are. Certainly, I'm choosing to be in the role is a factor, but just my style. When I lead people, I lead good people. I don't tolerate underperformance. And I say to people, they'll say to me, when they come in for an interview, well, can you tell me what your leadership style is? And I'd say, well, it's hard to describe my style, but let me just tell you a couple of things. If you're someone who wants to stretch yourself and grow and be your best, you're going to love working for me. If you don't, then you're going to hate my guts. I'm going to be your worst nightmare because I'm not going to let you be mediocre. You come onto my team, you're not going to be mediocre. And if you want to be, then this just isn't the right place for you. And I'm really happy to find you another role. I'll support you and help you find it that's more suited to you, where the environment's a little less demanding. And you're not a bad person. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that not everyone wants to be like this. And so I've really had that sort of attitude. For the people who did make it onto the team and enjoyed it, I felt a huge amount of camaraderie. So we've just come through friendly, not friends, right? But a huge amount of camaraderie with my team. And I've always thought that business is serious, but you don't need to take yourself seriously. So there was always an element of fun and humor. And even in the darkest of circumstances, we could make a joke. And that's sort of cool. And I'm quite sad that the world is losing this, because sometimes the best way through adversity is with humor. And I think the more that gets suppressed, the worse off we all are for that. And it's a bit of a shame. And I know there's a range of sensitivities and, we have to be mindful of other people and what it means to them. But when you're in a group of people well, have at it, right? And enjoy the time you spend together, because life's too short. And so for those reasons, I never felt particularly lonely. And add to that the fact that I'm always very happy to take on individual accountability. It doesn't stress me and it doesn't worry me, and I don't fear it in any way, shape, or form. I always felt pretty good about it. I love what I'm doing now, and I'd never do anything different. But, I loved my corporate career. It was cool. There were some things I didn't like about it on the odd occasion, but I loved it. It was so much fun. I never felt lonely. Everything that I did, I had people around me who were additive, and I achieved a lot of things, but I saw a lot of things and learned a lot about myself. And that's incredibly rewarding.
Thank you very much for answering that. Marty, thank you for joining me today. This was such a fun conversation, and man, we really went a lot of different directions with that. So thanks for coming along.
You can always rely on me to take a tangent somewhere, Morgan. Thanks for that. But no, it is, I must admit, having listened to a few of your back episodes, I had no idea where this was going, but I've loved the conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I really hope that, your listeners and your community get a lot out of it.
I think they will. And I'll definitely put all of your information about how people can work with you, your book, your podcast, et cetera, in the show notes, so that if people want to continue to explore the topics of how to even develop more self-mastery, how to be indispensable in their companies, and how to be good leaders, I'm going to point them in your direction for sure. So thank you again. And for all of my listeners, before we go, P.S. we expire. Hey, before you go, if you've enjoyed today's episode, I've got a free guide for you called The Mortality Mindset: 6 Practices to Cultivate a More Purposeful Life. Visit morganmotzinger.com/purpose to download your copy. Remember, life is short, but it's never too late to start living it fully.